two of NASCAR's biggest champions, said publicly and on record that they wanted to take on Australia's deadliest racetrack. Both men signed the deals. Both men backed out before a single lap. What they were avoiding is a mountain road that has already killed 16 competitors with a concrete wall sitting close enough to touch. Austin Cindric signed the deal in September 2025, a Daytona 500 champion driving for Team Penske in the NASCAR Cup Series agreed to climb into a Ford Mustang for Tickford Racing at the Adelaide Grand Final around the same time. Another NASCAR champion, Kyle Larson, had also agreed to a similar deal, this time with Premier Racing, planning to race a supercar as a wildcard entry at that same event. Before either of them, Kyle Busch had already signed on for the same challenge a year earlier in 2024 with backing from 888 Race Engineering. All three men were reaching toward the same target, Mount Panorama Circuit, the mountain road outside Barst, New South Wales, widely considered the toughest test in Australian motorsport. Two of the three quit before they ever turned the wheel in competition. The third one went through with it, and the result told its own story. To understand why two NASCAR champions would sign contracts and then walk away, it helps to understand exactly what they were being asked to drive. Mount Panorama is not for most of the year a racetrack at all. It is a public road inside the town of Baurst. Residents drive it home from work. Tourists rent cars just to say they have completed a lap. The speed limit on this same stretch of road on every day it is not hosting a race sits at 60 kilometers an hour, and it is enforced strictly by local police. Then for a handful of weeks each year, that same public road becomes one of the most demanding circuits on the planet. The numbers explain why the lap measures 6,213 kilometers. It climbs and drops 174 meters between its highest and lowest points, with sections reaching a gradient as steep as 1 in 6. Since the circuit opened in 1938, 16 competitors have lost their lives racing there. That total includes Denny Hume, a Formula One world champion, who suffered a fatal heart attack at the wheel during a race weekend decades into his career. The track was never built to be a racetrack. In the early 1930s, during the Great Depression, the mayor of Borst, Martin Griffin, proposed a scenic tourist road up the mountain overlooking the town. He framed the project as unemployment relief construction, which meant government funding was available. Engineers built each corner a little wider than they approved plans called for. The road opened to the public on 17th of March 1938, and it has hosted racing in some form ever since. It was designed for regular cars driving up and down a mountain, not for race cars pushing anywhere near their limits. To this day, residents still live along sections of the circuit, and anyone can drive both directions around the entire lap themselves, provided they stay under that same 60 km an hour limit. Now, consider the machines these NASCAR champions would have to drive. NASCAR's current Next G Cup car weighs a minimum of roughly 3,200 lb without the driver and produces up to 670 horsepower on most tracks. It runs a 5-speed sequential gearbox, and NASCAR drivers do not use the clutch to downshift during a race. They match engine revs to road speed purely by feel, with no tachometer and no speedometer in front of them, relying on instinct built over thousands of laps. It is a genuinely difficult skill, but it remains the driver's own muscle memory doing the work with nothing electronic assisting. The Supercars Gen 3 car, the machine used in the Bathurst 1000s and at the Adelaide Grand Final, is noticeably lighter at roughly 240 lb and powered by a naturally aspirated V8 producing around 600 horsepower, depending on whether the car is a Ford or a Chevrolet. It also runs a manual sequential gearbox with no assistance whatsoever. Drivers heel and toe by hand, blipping the throttle with the side of the right foot, while the heel still presses the brake, often dropping 2 gears at once on a descent steep enough to make ears pop. There is another difference that separates the two machines completely. Supercars run a spool differential, essentially a locked rear axle with no torque distribution between the two rear wheels at all. It is a brutally old-fashioned setup that demands a completely different steering technique through every corner. Drivers who step into a supercar for the first time consistently describe the car as fighting them for the entire lap before they have even reached a single corner. At Baurst, get a downshift even slightly wrong in that car, and the rear tires can lock instantly. On a NASCAR oval, a spinning car usually finds gravel or grass. At Borst, a spinning car usually finds concrete. That difference in car design connects directly to the death toll on the mountain. And the corners each carry their own history. The cutting, a pair of tight left-handers, leading into a steep exit, has claimed cars for decades. Because the narrow space and steep gradient make it almost impossible to get moving forward again. After a spin, in 2005, drivers Marcos Ambrose and Greg Murphy collided at this exact spot. After neither would give way, partially blocking the entire circuit. McFilley Park is dangerous for a different reason. It is a fast downhill left-hander, made completely blind by a crest right before the turn-in point. Alan Moffat, one of the circuit's most decorated drivers, hit the wall there head-on during practice in 1986 while sharing a car with his longtime rival Peter Brock. A year later, British driver Wyn Percy crashed at almost the exact same spot in almost the exact same way during practice for the following year's race. Griffin's Bend has punished drivers who drift wide on exit for decades, including a fiery crash in 2011 after a car left pit lane with insufficient front brake pressure on fresh brakes. Quarry Corner carries its own scar tissue as well. In 980 race leader, Dick Johnson struck a large rock that had been dislodged from the spectator area, destroying his car while he was leading and cruising toward what looked like a certain win. Then there is Conrad Strait, the fastest and most dangerous stretch of the entire lap. So many fatal accidents happened there at full speed that in 1987, following the death of driver Mike Bergman the year before, officials carved a high-speed chicane called the Chase directly into the straight purely to force cars to slow down before reaching the final corners. Even the very top of the mountain has not been safe ground. Peter Brock, a 9-time winner of the Borst 1000 and a man Australians nicknamed the King of the Mountain, had his first major Bowerst crash at Solomon Park near the summit, retiring his car after clipping the wall there in 1994. During qualifying for the 2015 Bowerst 1000, defending race winner Chas Mort clipped the wall on the run toward Forrest's Elbow at approximately 170 km/h. His car bounced from wall to wall before mounting the Eilauf concrete and slamming through a marshal's post, finally coming to rest in the middle of the track. Most was airlifted out with a fractured left femur and a fractured left wrist, ending his season on the spot. 7 track marshals were caught up in the same incident. Most later called it, in his own words, the biggest hit of his entire career. He went on to win the Supercars Championship in 2025, proof that even the mountain's worst can eventually be overcome. But only after paying a heavy price first. This is the environment that Austin Cindric walked into when he signed his Tickford Racing deal. His own team explained the significance of the moment. Tickford Racing Chief Executive Officer Simon Brookhouse said the arrangement represented an extraordinary wildcard addition to the Supercars grid in Adelaide. Cindric himself acknowledged his long-standing interest in the category, saying, "I've been a fan of the Supercars Championship since I was a kid." His debut weekend arrived soaked in rain with conditions shifting constantly across all 3 races. In the opening race, he started outside the top 20 and finished just ahead of the back of the field. Across the full weekend in a 25-car field made up of full-time Supercars professionals, his best result was 21st place, and in the final race, he crossed the line. 23rd. Describing his first race afterward, Cindric said, "My first race was wet. I think that's kind of the extent of it." Reflecting on the overall weekend, he said, "I would say I'm mildly satisfied, but I want to keep improving." Cindric did not walk in unprepared. Scott McLaughlin, a 3-time Supercars champion, and now Cindric's team Penske, stablemate in IndyCar, texted him every single day in the build-up. Shane Van Gisbergen himself offered to answer questions and review data after every session. Veteran Supercars driver Ganda followed Cindric on track during an early test and came away impressed. Even with that level of coaching behind him, Cindric still finished in the 20s in a 25. Car field in the rain, on a circuit far gentler than Bowerst itself. Adelaide has no 154-meter elevation change. It has no blind crest at McPhillamy Park. It has no adverse camber dragging the car sideways at Forrest's Elbow. Adelaide is flat, tight, and comparatively forgiving by Baist's standards, which makes the result even more telling, not less. That gap between the two forms of racing shows up in how each sport treats contact with the wall. In NASCAR, using the wall is a deliberate strategy. The bump and run is celebrated, and leaning on a rival's bumper to scrub. Off-speed has been normal racecraft since the sport's earliest days. At Baurst, that margin barely exists. The wall is not a tool a driver reaches for. It is a threat sitting a few feet away at all times. NASCAR cars are engineered with soft body construction, specifically so they can absorb wall contact and keep racing. Supercars Gen 3 machines are built stiffer, closer to a genuine road-going sports car, precisely because contact is not supposed to happen in the first place. These are two completely different design philosophies, built around two completely different assumptions about how a race is actually won. The reverse trip tells a very different story. Shane Van Gisbergen, a three-time Supercars champion, built his reputation partly on how he attacks Forrest's elbow, a corner with adverse camber that fights most drivers exactly when they need grip the most, instead of braking early to settle the car. Van Gisbergen carries the car in with a rear already rotating, feeding in throttle while the car is still sliding sideways, using the camber to accelerate out of the corner instead of fighting it. That exact skill set followed him when he crossed into NASCAR in July 2023, driving the number 91 Chevrolet for Trackhouse Racing's Project 91 program. He won the Grant Park 220 on the Chicago Street course in his very first Cup Series start, becoming the first driver to win in his NASCAR Cup Series debut in 60 years. Since Johnny Rutherford achieved the same feat in 1963, asked afterward if he genuinely believed a win was possible walking into that weekend, Van Gisbergen said, "No, of course not, but you always dream of it." That result was not a fluke. Van Gisbergen went on to have a full rookie Cup Series season in 2025, winning 5 races, the most of any rookie in NASCAR history, and he now stands as the most successful non-American-born driver in Cup Series history. Van Gisbergen has spoken directly about what would happen if NASCAR's own biggest stars attempted the trip in the opposite direction. Asked specifically about Kyle Busch, he said he would have loved to see how Busch fared in a supercar, adding that if Busch took it seriously, he believed the American would do well. Kyle Busch actually got close. He was reportedly lined up to drive a 8 Camaro at the 2024 Adelaide Grand Final as a wildcard, backed by an Australian telecommunications sponsor. That plan quietly fell apart before it was ever officially announced, with Busch citing an off-track commitment back home in the United States. Kyle Larson, the 2021 Cup Series champion, went further down the same road. He confirmed the interest was mutual, specifically naming Adelaide as the event he would like to attempt. And he called it something he genuinely wanted to do. He was officially scheduled to make his Supercars debut as a wildcard entry with Prey Air Racing at the 2025 Adelaide Grand Final, alongside an appearance in the event's companion sprint car program. In June 2025, he abruptly withdrew from the entire plan. The decision came directly after a grueling attempt to complete both the Indianapolis 500 and the Coca-Cola 600 on the same day, a stretch in which he crashed out of both races within the span of a few hours. Journalist Adam Stern reported the withdrawal directly, writing that NASCAR star Kyle Larson has pulled out of a planned Supercars debut at the Adelaide Grand Final this November. So, 2 of NASCAR's biggest names both wanted to make this exact trip. Both backed out before they ever turned a wheel in anger. The only driver who actually went and did it under real conditions, Austin Cindric, finished 21 and 23rd in a 25 car field on a circuit. That is not even Baurst itself, only its street course cousin in Adelaide. Shane Van Gisbergen proved that a road racer from Baurst could land in NASCAR and win in his first start, then back it up for an entire season. Austin Cindric proved that the reverse trip is a genuinely different challenge. A Daytona 500 winner finishing in the 20s, not the top 5, even on the gentler version of the mountain. Kyle Larson wanted to find out for himself. He pulled out. Kyle Busch was supposed to find out the year before.